I'm a woman. We are conditioned to people please. We are conditioned to keep our voice silent so that we don't rock the boat, we don't create waves. But what that creates is systemic self-betrayal.
It brought up questions in me. How many other women are feeling as suppressed as I felt?
We can so buy into the narrative that promises us all of our heart's desires if we only do everything right, but it's all a lie.
I'm challenged to understand whether or not 50% of women know how to show up in an authentic way. Like, I almost wonder if any women know how to show up in an authentic way.
We've been underestimated so many times, and now I love it. I love it when people underestimate me. Yeah, please, do it more. Ignore me, because let me show you what I'm gonna do.
I'm making a move. Study long, study wrong. Ain't nothing gonna happen on its own. I'm making a move. Don't need no hickeys for this song. I got joy all through my soul. I'm making a move. Get up, get it out. Mr. Sun is shining on me. I'm making a move. Got my luggage arms and I'm moving along. Yeah, I'm making a move.
When we look around today at the condition of women, and I'm gonna say other organizational outsiders as well in the workplace, it can be really helpful to understand the context we've come through.
This is a really long history, and one that, if you were to study it, would take you a lifetime. I think that we have existed in a place where women haven't always and still don't have equal footing as compared to men.
I want you to picture yourself in front of a really enormous pre-digital machine with like cogs and wheels, turning everything fitting perfectly. Once upon a time, years and years ago, people made choices about how this system would work. The people who made these choices were the people who held the most power. When they built those systems, they built them to produce the best outcomes for people like themselves. The outcomes they produce for others who are unlike them. They might not be really horrible, but in some cases they were actually built to have negative effects for certain groups and people. And I want you to use your imagination and some conjecture. Who do you think was sitting around the table?
When there's a group of people or a segment of society that's in power, that has more power than another segment, it's incumbent on that segment to create some equality.
I was the youngest person at that table. I was the only racialized person at that table. And I was the only person who might experience some kind of reputational blowback if I said something, because I have been in spaces where I have said something and I was told, "You're just a social justice warrior." It's because you're a woman, completely dismissing or minimizing the fact that I am a colleague, a professional, an educated human being with a perspective on the world that might in fact challenge yours. And that challenge would be uncomfortable.
And so the bias of the people who sat at the tables making the decisions about how these systems would work, they got built into those systems. And if we just go about our day-to-day doing things the way they've always been done, then we don't have to have malintent to be upholding the bias in those systems that creates the conditions for oppression, discrimination, and injustice.
And so I was constantly questioning, like, why is it this way? Why are we doing it this way? Like, if the policy sucks, why aren't we advocating to change it? We're the people who see firsthand how much damage this does.
And those systems, those wheels and cogs, they keep turning unless we find a wrench and throw it in the works.
There's still this huge mountain that we need to climb in terms of women's voices actually being heard and their voices meaning something.
If we find the wrench to throw in the works, we find that wrench by talking to each other about our lived experience.
Because growing up, I lived in a racially homogenous society. It had never occurred to me that I was different or less than or other. And it was only in my immigrant experience in relation to folks of different skin tone that I realized that now all of a sudden I had to reconcile that I had brown skin. And that journey of realizing that you are different, or for me, realizing that I am different, also created for me a desire to fit in, a desire to amalgamate, to integrate. And over my adolescent and young adult years, what that created was a real suppression of my wholeness, my authenticity, my ability to show up and be who I am.
I became aware really young that my authentic self didn't necessarily fit into the rigid culture around me. And so I started to mold her into something that did fit in.
You know, at recess, like, it wasn't even proper tag. It was like boys chase girls. And I was like, why? And I remember telling girls, like, if we just gang up together, I don't think they can chase us anymore. And if we just kind of banded together, that we didn't have to play by those rules anymore, that we could actually change the game.
I was doing postgraduate study and I just had my first child. And I was studying the lives and work of women at the turn of the 20th century. And they were writing back and forth to each other with letters. But what they were writing, like, it could have been the stuff of tweets. It sounded so familiar, the types of barriers women were experiencing, the challenges they were facing in their communities, in their marriages, and so on. It resonated way too much with me. And so as I was sitting there, my kid, this writing, I thought, like, this can't be her story too.
So something that I experienced at the age of 5, if that's stored in my system as a protective or adaptive experience, it is going to show up later, even in a boardroom. So if at age 5 I learned I shouldn't get angry at other people and express my anger outwardly because I'm told to put away my attitude, for example, I'm just carrying suitcases of experiences teaching me how to behave and how to get along.
A lot of our problems are rooted in the way that we talk about gender, the way we socialize kids when it comes to gender, the way we've divided it up into what is a binary, but also a hierarchy, where we've said that masculine traits, qualities are valued and feminine ones are not.
So, you know, in what's called frequently the second wave of feminism back in the, 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was really common for us to name what was going on in the workplace and in the home. There was sexism, there was misogyny, there was homophobia, there was racism. We called these things by those names. And there was a massive uprising. There was the women's movement, and it led the way for legislative changes that have been really important. Childcare issues, equal pay issues, they were all put on the front stage.
We can look to feminist scholars like Bell Hooks. She has like a wonderful definition of patriarchy. She says that it's institutionalized sexism. So it's the ways in which we see those kind of rules play out in every single institution that we are a part of. So that goes all the way from family to religion, to education systems, to like every kind of institution we interact with.
I really do think feminism is misunderstood. True feminism, from what I understand it originally, and I really do count myself as a feminist, is true feminism is equality. Feminism really, really does benefit everybody. So we're talking about men, women, all genders, everybody that has been traditionally marginalized.
When all of the fury died down, there was a narrative that we'd made it, that, glass ceilings were being smashed, the workplace was welcoming to women, that now it was just up to you to climb that ladder and make your way to the top. The barriers were gone. But that created a lot of confusion for women who continued to encounter, if not the same barriers, the barriers were dressed up in new clothes.
While there is a lot of good forward momentum in moving away from, literally being assaulted in your workplace, I think there's still a lot of small, or we could call them small, but very insidious ways in which women are told to, do things for free, especially emotional labor, especially social planning, remembering everyone else's birthdays and being the ones who buy the cake. I think there's a great book title, something about like women don't buy the cakes anymore, so something like that. Feminism benefits men and patriarchy also harms men. So like, if we want to see feminism as this antidote to patriarchy, then that's going to be something that actually benefits men as well. The other piece of it too is like, we're not really going to progress on gender equality if only women care about it.
But the narrative that we'd made it was so pervasive that when women experienced bias and discrimination in the workplace, they started going, is this just me? Like, don't we now have equality? So what am I doing wrong? Am I not hacking my productivity well enough? Or am I not learning how to hold my shoulders back but not too far back, and to like lower my register a little but not too far, and express my ideas with enthusiasm but not seem aggressive? Like, what can I do differently? And that like put us in this tangle of self-criticism, but also prevented us in that process from like turning to our friend and going, are you feeling this too?
Up until recently, I didn't think there was a patriarchy anymore. I didn't think that I had a disadvantage as a woman. I thought the stories of harm from gender inequality were mostly about women just not being bold enough, strong enough, logical enough, expressive enough. A lot of my ignorance came from both not being conscious of being suppressed myself and being an unknowing subscriber to the patriarchy.
Love and domination can't coexist. And so if we want to live in a society where love is actually possible, we have to move beyond patriarchy.
This idea that until white women can't experience equality with white men, no other women can. We see it today in trans exclusionary feminism, where we say that until cis women can't experience that equality with cis men, then trans women cannot be part of the conversation or the equation, and there cannot be room at the table for unpacking the gender construct. There is not only enough room, but the goal is not equality with white men.
As women gain more power and more say in society, society benefits, and men as part of society will also benefit. So there's this sense that sometimes it's a zero-sum game. If I give up power, then I'll have less power. If I share power, that, you know what I mean? That's not true. The truth is that it's one of those things that when we share it, it multiplies, and more power is created.
There is enough room for you, for me, for people who don't look like either of us, don't present like either of us, to be a part of an inclusive society. The goal is not for us to have power over one another, but to share power with one another.
I was doing some qualitative research before this, collecting stories from other women about what happened when they expressed an authentic idea. And it was hard to hear, and it's hard to remember my own experience and how they're so often shut down. And big themes that I heard were feeling like the bar was higher and notably different for them as a woman than male counterparts.
And so instead of working 40 hours a week and having a balanced life, I worked 70 hours a week. A lot of that work was invisible work. It was so much stuff that doesn't get recognized, but is essential to move a department forward.
Another theme was the fear of speaking up about harmful experiences. So part of that was needing to collect evidence and document harm that was occurring, because the automatic belief is I will not be believed. I will be, again, rocking the boat that will affect the advancement of my career, that will hurt me. So I better have proof that this thing is happening.
When we talk about suppression, we very, very quickly learn what is acceptable and what is not acceptable.
So the first experience that I gained as a young working woman where I realized, oh, okay, I think I'm gonna be up against some stuff, and I would define it explicitly as sexism in the workplace. I was having my first intense conversation with a very senior leader in this construction industry that I was working in, and we happened to be walking down the hallway, and in his mind and in that moment found it okay or necessary to comment that I, that day, picked the perfect pair of jeans for my body. And I do believe that's when my armor started to go up.
Like, what is it that we're doing or not doing to change this narrative that's been running for at least 150 years, but much, much longer?
And in that moment, I was so embarrassed. I was mad, really wanted to speak out. There's a funny term called career limiting decisions. And this umbrella of professionalism that keeps so many women suppressed and not able to fully express what they're experiencing is don't do that. It's not professional, it's career limiting.
I think as a woman, I have been raised and taught in my environment to be kind, to be responsible for the experiences of people in the room, to not rock the boat.
Somebody asked me the question, said, at what point did you realize that you weren't safe? And in reality, I didn't realize what safety meant in the workplace.
What can I say? What can't I say? Who can I be? Who can I not be? And when comments are made, whether they are racist or sexist or ableist or ageist or any of the ists, I felt like it bothered me for sure. And I did talk about it with somebody, but I didn't feel like I was able to talk about it with the people who, you know, either said it or would have like their superiors or whatever. That just wasn't like a safe environment for me. Even my manager made it not a safe space for myself.
And there's only one organization, one example, it was a paramilitary organization where I, for the first time in my life, recognized that I was a female and that I was a person of color. I never experienced that before. And I actually had a very difficult time saying that to myself, and that I wasn't actually gonna have the impact that I know I wanted to have because I'm a woman and because I'm brown.
And so much of the advice I received was, just shake it off. It doesn't matter. Super insignificant. You need to develop thick skin.
And so you think about all those little tiny, tiny experiences that have happened that you're like, oh, that's wrong. Ooh, that didn't feel good. Oh, somebody told me I should use different words. Somebody told me I should dress differently. Somebody told me that today I didn't do my hair. Today somebody told me I'm too aggressive. Yesterday somebody told me I'm not aggressive enough.
I wasn't able to recognize that I had been suppressing who I really was to fit in. Even if you're not conscious of suppression, it can be happening. And it's very toxic.
And I think as women, we also don't necessarily have the role models, the person that we can go and have a conversation to say, do you think what I was sharing in that meeting, do you think that point of view that I was bringing forward made sense? And I'm not convinced that men necessarily are challenged in the same way to share their voice.
It's soul crushing when we don't feel seen, when we don't feel heard or acknowledged. And so that's a huge, huge problem for women in the workplace, or just sometimes even in their families.
I worked for a global Fortune 500 organization located in Silicon Valley, the most incredible organization I've ever worked for. The expectation was set that if you were in a meeting, you could not be passive. You had to contribute because they realized that that really would bring a fulsome perspective. Now, in 2016, flash forward to when, for the first time in a long time, I worked in Edmonton. And the experience was much, much different.
I'm in this state where I'm trying to self-discover and transform into an individual who can leave a lasting impact, a legacy on our world by challenging current thought processes and exploring possibilities.
Often qualifications were questioned. Often we were spoke over. Often we were not given the respect for some of the ideas that we brought forward. So it was quite a contrast for me, and one that I really had to become aware of and take deliberate personal action to operate different. And I at first really even didn't know how to react, and at first almost questioned whether what I was experiencing was bias.
Early in my career, there was a lot of, I worked in aerospace, a lot of ex-military, all men, very few women, sitting on a management team of 14 people, and I'm the only woman and the youngest. And so for my voice to get heard, I had to be very, very strong and intentional.
This is really about women having a voice and communication. If part of the environment or part of the team doesn't have a voice, if there's no communication coming, how do we know what they're thinking? How do we get their inputs? How do we really benefit from all of their knowledge and their experience? And if we don't have good, clear, clean, safe communication, none of that stuff happens.
So when I would go into meetings and I would share sort of, I think, why don't we look at it this way, look at things differently? My voice was physically heard, but did it actually influence the decision that was being made? Absolutely not.
The idea that I, within myself, have to live with a sense of betrayal so that everybody else around me can live with a sense of comfort feels like something that I'm no longer willing to pay a price for.
You went deeper. Did that feel good?
It was so good.
That felt so good. That felt better, hey?
Yeah.
Okay.
Far too many women are trying to thrive in these environments without a consciousness for what is working against them. They are striving alone. They are perceiving themselves as the problem. They are being told that they are the problem.
It really does point out that there's huge opportunity cost when we don't actually listen to or value voices of people who are different from us, right? And in this case, women.
There aren't many spaces designed by and for women and other groups who are not the ones typically making decisions. When the spaces we live and work in are not designed by or for us, we are outsiders in those spaces.
I was showing up as a man for the approval of men in a system that was built by men.
I believe that was, a pretty pivotal point in my career, saying, sure, you've allowed the diversity to come to the table, but you aren't creating an inclusive and psychologically safe place for people to show up and be their authentic selves. And you can only have your voice ignored so many times before you walk away. And I've walked away.
So when we learn that we won't be heard when we speak up, we learn not to. We learn not to rock the boat, and we keep our opinions to ourselves. That'll stop women from advancing in their careers and whatever roles they're living in their lives. We can't set boundaries if we can't speak up and express our authentic selves and our authentic needs. So then we lose our whole sense of self in that. And that is the saddest thing to me.
That 15-year climb, I now characterize as my one-way ticket to loss of sense of self-ville. At no point in any time did anybody around me as a woman say, know yourself, embrace yourself.
I am a neurodivergent individual, and I'm actually really proud of it because there are superpowers that come along with neurodivergence. But there are some hindrances and there's a lot of stigma. And I felt that I could not talk about my neurodivergence in my workplace. I didn't want to shoot myself in the foot and have anyone in my professional life think that I wasn't a triple threat.
My first part of the job when I got hired, my title was business manager. And shortly into my tenure, the two founders decided to step away and asked if I would consider taking over the reins. And I remember calling my parents and being very excited about the opportunity, but then saying to them and to me, like, I don't know, I don't have all the answers. I don't know, I don't have the experience to run this business. I've never done this before. I don't know that I can do it. And then thinking to myself, wow, I sound like a woman. And then I decided that I'm going to do it. That was a mind-blowing moment for me in my career. Absolutely mind-blowing.
Anything that was more masculine than feminine, I pushed myself towards. I pushed myself towards every masculine expression in the workplace that I could, because every time I did, it was met with applause. It was met with promotion. It was met with more influence and success.
So when I talk about male-dominated industries, I existed in those spaces. And so I really think I showed up in a way that was replicating what I saw inside of those organizations.
We all put on a really brave face and make like we're succeeding because that's kind of what we're being told we should be doing. You can see how impossible it could be to make personal change, let alone systemic change,
when I don't show up as my authentic self. Inherently, organizations and people miss out on innovation and therefore impacting their competitive advantage.
I very much felt that in order to succeed, I had to hide the very best parts of me.
I would always be the one sharing the different opinion. I would be the one sharing a different perspective because I have a different lived experience than everyone else. And quite frankly, there are a lot of spaces, and actually I should say there's pretty much every space I've ever been in, there's no one that looks like me. And I've yet to actually meet someone who looks like me.
I consulted to a fintech company and they had this problem, which was that when it came time for performance reviews, women were giving their self-evaluations and they weren't doing as well as expected. And I asked them, can you walk me through the spaces? And a candidate would start in the reception room where they had men's magazines on the table, like GQE type stuff. And then the woman would go into one of 4 boardrooms, each of which was lovingly named after a male conqueror of sorts. And then she would need to present her self-evaluation in front of what was at the time an all-male executive team.
And I truly believe, because I've experienced it, that an amazing collection of fabulous, well-meaning, conscious individuals can still form an organization or a culture which suppresses authentic feminine expression.
There's research to show that we pick up on all of the cues in our environment. We are permeable to all of the messages that are either overt or covert, and they tell us whether we belong or we don't belong.
I remember going golfing so many times early in my career to fit in because that's what everybody else does. And so I'm happy to say that I don't spend my Saturdays golfing anymore.
When women look up at the top levels of their organization, when they look at the C-suite and that executive table, and they see, 1 woman out of 8 people, they don't see that there are 8 opportunities for them to achieve a place at that table. They see 1.
There have been conditions that have been placed on us externally that have now caused us to show up differently in the work environment.
When there is not equal representation of women in an organization, it signals to the women in that organization that they don't have an equal opportunity to thrive, and it turns them into their own competition.
I personally have observed women showing up in an inauthentic way because they have to fit in. And that idea of having to fit in with the majority has yielded them success in their careers because they have been able to move up that sort of perceived corporate ladder and get to the top and get to more senior level roles.
Is it any wonder that dominant narratives out there try and keep us in competition with one another?
I didn't feel safe to express myself, to be authentic. And again, hindsight being 2020, I don't even think I knew what my authenticity was back then.
There is a phenomenon called the sisterhood ceiling. This is a phenomenon that is created when there is inequality, when there are opaque opportunities for advancement, when criteria isn't clear, when you've got an underrepresentation of women in leadership in particular. It creates the conditions of scarcity that signal to all of the women in that setting, in that organization, in that community, that you don't actually have an equal opportunity to thrive, that your competition isn't just everybody around you, it's actually just the women around you.
Sometimes I'm part of the problem. Sometimes I don't even realize it that I'm not elevating women, or I'm creating spaces where people don't feel safe. And sometimes that happens because we're not aware and we're not present in the moment.
Not only do we hurt ourselves, we hurt each other. The very people we could be collaborating with to make advances, to break down barriers.
As a woman of color with a disability, leading other women, showing them what strength is, showing them what good leadership is, showing them humility when I make a mistake, it makes me feel like I have a very big responsibility.
As women, we have responsibilities. If we're in roles, in senior level roles, in organizations where it's predominantly still male dominated, we have opportunities to make sure that we allow younger, ambitious women who aspire to be in those kinds of roles the opportunity to see her face and to see somebody else who looks like them doing that job or that role or that speaking opportunity, and so that they can feel like, well, if she can do it, I can do it.
And to be able to show women that we can pump each other up. We don't have to tear each other down. We can literally help each other get to the top. There's so much room at the top, so much room. Let's bring as many of ourselves as we can.
None of us is free until all of us is free. And the very few women who've been able to achieve power in male-dominated areas would probably tell you they've done it by making some pretty significant sacrifices and by not being able to lean into things like collaboration or collectivism or co-creation, but they themselves have been co-opted by the systems that really haven't changed a whole lot.
When we are not ourselves, the world misses out.
None of us has this figured out. I don't know a single woman in my life who every single day feels like she's succeeding in embodying her ideals. Whether it has something to do with makeup or clothes or body or whatever, or what she buys or what she eats, like none of us has this figured out. This is an everyday struggle until we live in a world in which these things are not imposed upon us.
And my want for people who have experienced gender marginalization is for us to continue to invest in reflecting where the system that we're fighting with also resides within us. Where is that internalized misogyny? Where is that internalized racism? Where is that internalized transphobia that we are grappling with, and then being really painfully honest with ourselves to do the work of unlearning those things
So there was the magic of this environment of the magazine club that years later, Jen and I both came back together and realized that place, that magazine club place, offered us a practice and a unique environment to feel really influential as our authentic selves, where it didn't necessarily exist in other spaces.
I'm making a move. Study long, study wrong. Ain't nothing gonna happen on its own. I'm making a move. Don't need no hinges for this song. I got joy all through my soul. I'm making a move. Get up, get out. Mr. Sun is shining on me. I see